Hi and welcome to Homo Ludens, the channel on history and board games. I'm Fred Serval and thank you for joining us tonight. If you're watching this show live, I remind you that you should feel free to comment and ask some questions to my guest in the live chat, and I will be pushing those questions onto the stream. If you're watching this after the fact, so in a couple of days, I will have added some timestamps in the description so that you can navigate through the different section of the interview. And I will be explaining a bit more about how I structure this interview when my guest will be on. Talking about guests, I am very happy to have on the show a very well-known and beloved designer that I feel hasn't been very visible on YouTube yet, with the exception of an interview by Dan from No Enemies Here last year. That was a great interview. And I think this is a shame because over the last decade, my guest has been very active and releasing very exciting and innovative games like Space Corp, D-Day series, also the Enemy Action series, World War II Commander, and many more. And I'm very excited to have tonight John Butterfield. Hi, John.
Hi, Fred. Nice to see you.
Very nice of you to be joining us on YouTube. That's really nice to have you here. And as we discussed, John, I structured this interview in 3 parts and an interlude. So first, we'll talk about a bit your background as a designer. Then we'll have a discussion about your current projects, Downfall notably, and also Enemy Action Kharkov we'll discuss about. Then we'll have a small interlude and introducing a new segment to the show that's called the Wargame Questionnaire. So we'll try and have fun with that. And then the final section would be dedicated to discussing about solo wargaming specifically, as a lot of your work has been also very central to the evolution of solo wargaming. So yeah, does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Great. I can see that there is already quite a few people online, so that's great to have so many people live on the show. So that's great. I see that David just dropped us a message just before leaving out from work, and I hope that he will be able to join us before the end of the stream. I think we're going to have 60 minutes chat, maybe a bit more, up to 90 minutes, so we'll see about that. I can see that we have Peter from Denmark being here. So hey, Peter. And then we have a few people, a lot of questions regarding Space Corp, and we'll probably discuss this a bit because I think that's also a hot topic that people are mentioning a lot. And obviously also a lot of questions around Ambush, but that's something to be expected, I guess. But that's great to have all of you online tonight. That's really cool. And I guess that maybe, John, we can just jump in.
Yeah.
Great, but then we'll start with our first section, which is your backstory. So we're going to have a bit of a cinematic approach and talk about John Butterfield, the character, like how you got into wargaming and your beginnings, but also how, talk a bit maybe about your overall career, but also your perspective on how you think the hobby evolved over your time as a designer. But maybe just to start, I think that's something that I like to ask, because wargaming is a volunteer army. As Harold Buchanan says, it's always interesting to know what the designer is also doing in his daily life, because most of us we don't have our whole life dedicated to wargaming, and I would like to know, well, what do you do or used to do when you were not a wargame designer in your day job, you could say.
Yeah, well, I recently retired. In December, I retired, and now I am pretty much designing games full time. But prior to that, for the 8 years prior to that, I worked for Facebook as a UX and product designer. Not designing the things you would see if you use Facebook, but designing the tools the engineers use to create and manage their code and deploy it, which is a huge part of the Facebook process. So I did that for about 8 years. And prior to that, I was mostly in exhibition design for museums and exhibits. I was a designer of experiences for museums. So that was my day job for many, many years.
That's really interesting. So you went from user experience in a physical environment for museums and interaction with pieces of art, but also navigating through the architecture of a specific set to actually, I guess, build a narrative around around an exhibition to user experience for development in a for websites, a website like Facebook. How did that shift? Is there a lot of similarities between the two?
Well, that's a good question, because when I started in exhibit design, there really was no digital design yet. The computers were just getting. I started doing exhibit design in the 80s, and the internet didn't come along until the mid-late 90s. And so in exhibit design, though, there started to be things like touch screens in exhibits, and a lot of our work was with content-based museums like history museums, natural history museums, science centers, that sort of thing. So we were designing educational experiences, and as technology improved or progressed, not always an improvement, I guess, we started using that media in our exhibits. And so I gained a lot of experience and insight into what it meant to interact with the screen-based environment. And then that kind of translated into designing for the web. And then ultimately to doing the kind of work I did for Facebook. Yeah.
And then the natural follow-up question that I have, going back to the topic that is the reason why you're here today, is that did you feel like your professional experience as a UX designer had some form of influence on the way you approach game design?
Yes, although I think the reverse is more true. I think.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
My experience in game design, which I had done early, I worked at SPI prior to getting into exhibition design. I think game design very much informed my approach to designing educational experiences, and then later to a screen, digital design, in fact, I use that often as kind of a selling point on my resume, because for a while I did it as a consultant, and so I featured my experience in game design as a way to approach design solutions for exhibits.
Yeah, because you would agree that we could say that historical games specifically, or educational experiences, just of a different type, like it's just a different way to display knowledge and have the user interact with it. So there is actually a lot of similarities in the way of, as building an exhibition, especially in an history museum, there is some parallels that could be made about how you're going to have the person interact with the knowledge itself that is being displayed in one side in a ludic format, and the other more in a either art display or something like this.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels there. One of the big differences is that in a public environment, in a museum, primarily you need to engage the visitor. When someone buys a game, they're already engaged. They bought the game. You don't need to get them interested in World War II, for example. Or I actually did work with a World War I museum. And so, how we were going to engage the public in understanding what World War I even was, very few people today really understand it. And so it was not so much about, simulating World War I as it was in connecting with the visitor's experience and how World War I might relate to their lives. So it's an interesting bridge there.
Okay. Now going back to wargaming specifically, and that's also in the title. I told this interview 4 decades of wargaming. So, and we might actually have started before, and that's maybe the first question that I would like to ask you is, how did you got into wargame? Not wargame design yet, but what got you into wargaming first?
Well, I was into board games much before I was into war games. As a kid, I had many brothers and sisters, and my parents, and we all enjoyed board games. And so we were playing, the standard things like Monopoly and Careers and Candyland when I was little, and Risk when I was older. But we also came across Avalon Hill games, not the war games, but games like Air Empire and Verdict. And then in the late 60s, the 3M games like Acquire and Executive Decision and Mr. President, not to be confused with the upcoming GMT game. And so we played those a lot. And in fact, my parents were kind of pacifists, so we didn't have like gun toys when we were little. So I don't think I could bring a war game home. when I was little. That changed by the time I was in high school. And then I discovered with some friends Diplomacy, the game Diplomacy, which is, one of the most evil games ever designed, but a lot of fun. And so I played that a lot with my college friends when we weren't or high school friends when we weren't playing poker. And so that, I guess, was the closest thing to a war game I was really playing. But then when I got into college, I started seeing these ads for SPI in magazines like National Lampoon and Analog, and they advertised a lot back then. And so I was just really curious about it. And I went to visit my brother who was going to Yale, and his roommate had this closet full of SPI games. And so I started checking them out, and then I realized, SPI's in New York. I just started school in New York at Parsons School of Design. And so I went to their offices just to see what they were about. And they had an opening in their shipping department, which at the time in 1973, 74, their offices and their shipping were all in one place. That wasn't true later. And so even before I got into war games, I was working in SPI shipping, and then for about half a year, and then it stopped working with my school schedule, so I left. But I got to know some of the people there, and then started playing some of the games. And then a few years later, after I graduated art school and was schlepping my illustration portfolio around, because that's what I thought I was going to do, and I did do a lot of illustration professionally, but I went back to SPI and did a portfolio interview with Redmond Simonson. And it wasn't quite a fit, the kind of work I did and what SPI needed. But he took me around. And again, I had met him briefly before, but he remembered me. And then I really looked into play testing there. So I started play testing on Friday nights at SPI. And then I started working there part-time as a militia. That was their expression for people who not only helped with playtesting, but made like playtest kits and ran errands and assisted designers. So I started doing that because my illustration income was a little slow, freelancing in New York City. And then I really got into it. I really started enjoying the games a lot. But I'd always had this background in games and in art and creativity. So I decided to try my own hand at a game. So I picked an obscure World War II battle on the East Front, the first Battle of Rostov.
Yeah.
And just kind of on my own, I took the Panzer Group Guderian system and designed a little game on Rostov. And I submitted it, or basically just to, what do you think? And they liked it, and they decided to build a quadra game around it called Army Group South. So they decided to publish that game and got 3 other people to design other games on the East Front for the Army Group South quad. It took a while for that to get published. That was a long process, but that kind of got me started in game design professionally.
Army Group South was your first game, and that's interesting because I had a question actually about how you started in game design, and thank you for walking us through that. I think it's really interesting to see you can start in the mailroom, that you can go into the playtesting playtesting kit. I really love the term militia, and I think that's like with a few people, so other designers or also developers at working on GMT titles right now, we already have that kind of dynamic about making modules to playtest online, looking at different components. And I think the term militia is actually quite cool. We should revive the term for this informal army of people who are making working on the fact that the development of games is happening. That's really cool. And I was looking through the timeline of the games that you had, and there was something that struck me, is that the first game that I saw on BGG that was considered your first design in terms of release date was A Dawn of the Dead. So an adaptation of Romero's movie that was released the same year, so in 1978. And I was wondering, so that wasn't your first game. That actually potentially was your second or third game, I guess. But
yeah, Dawn of the Dead was a little later because I also did a little science fiction game called Stargate.
yeah,
And then I was helping develop games like the game Battles for the Ardennes. I developed that. That was a Danny Parker design. And I did a co-design development of Freedom in the Galaxy. That was all before Dawn of the Dead. I think perhaps the copyright on Dawn of the Dead is based on when the movie came out.
on the movie was released.
Not-
Yeah, and that's
The game came out a little bit later. So that's my guess.
okay, because I was surprised that you actually managed to release the game the same year as the movie, and I was like, how did this happen? That must have been a massive amount of work. But yeah,
Well,
so
I did see the movie before it came out because
yeah, that's what I was wondering
had
about.
a contract to do that, but they did, and I got to meet George Romero, which was pretty cool. So
That's really awesome. That's great. And was he a gamer, or he
No,
just saw
not
this
at
as a complete oddity? Yeah,
Not at
okay.
all. He was kind of intrigued that it was going to become a game, but I don't actually know if he ever did play it, but he did. Yeah.
And how was it working on an IP? Because it's something that in wargame design we don't do that often, I guess. Like working on intellectual properties. Was it a very different approach, or?
Not really, because they were very hands off. I think they just, sold this license and they didn't really, as I recall, have any review input into the game at all. So I think we watched the movie and I kind of decided, let's just focus. I don't know if you know the story, it's mostly in a shopping mall. So I just said, well, let's just focus on the battle for the shopping mall and trying to defend it, and then make a game out of that. And yeah. So.
And on that note, so you were talking about the fact that your first game was on the East Front, then you made a smaller sci-fi game called Stargate, and then Dawn of the Dead, but also other war games. And it feels like you have really two work streams in a way, like you're making either sci-fi games or historical games. And I was wondering, did you approach those differently when in your process of designing them, or what are the differences in the way you work on those different topics?
I'm not sure the process is different. I mean, if it's a science fiction thing that's being made up, Dawn of the Dead was based on something. So to me, it was, simulating an event that happened. So that was like a war game in a way. Stargate was made up. In fact, it was based loosely. I had co-authored a science fiction book that came out called The Extraterrestrial Report. And so I borrowed a lot of ideas from that to put into the Stargate game. But then I'm trying to think, well, Friedman, I guess the first original science fiction game I worked on was Voyage of the Pandora. And that was, we had James Dunnigan had designed Wreck of the Pandora for our Ares magazine. And then it was thought to do a prequel to that game, because Wreck of the Pandora is basically Alien. An alien runs amok on a spaceship and kills everyone. So we thought, well, let's do the prequel about the adventures of that ship on its mission before. So in that game, I really want that. Yeah, that really wasn't a war game. That was like a storytelling game. So I think I was looking at science fiction as a novel, right?
Yeah.
We're going to allow you to play the novel. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe more narrative driven. And looking at which is Ambush is also very narrative driven in a way. So like you're building it's your story in a very innovative way, but still it feels very narrative driven. And about this, staying on the topics of what subjects you're approaching as a designer. So we talk about sci-fi and the fact that you're also making historical games. And looking at historical games, it looks like you are only doing World War II games. And I was wondering, why was that? Was there any other parts of history that you might be interested in, or why did you decide to only make World War II games, or it's just always the topic that seems natural to you?
Yeah, I don't know why I'm always in World War II, but I just always enjoyed researching it. I was interested in World War II prior to becoming a game designer, and just the massive scale of the whole war and its impact on the whole world, and all the parts of it. There's so many things to be said about it, but I'm not primarily a historian. I'm a game designer, and so if there's a subject that I think will make a good game, I want to do that. And World War II is full of those things. And I don't know, maybe I'm lazy because, then if I want to do something on Napoleonics, I really have to do a lot of, research before I'd feel qualified. So
yes, and it's actually, yeah. It's more, I like this idea of recycling research. It's like you've put in so much effort in researching on the East Front, like you're going to milk that research as much as you can, like making as many games out of it. It's just more cost efficient in terms of time. That's a good way to look at it. And on that topic, and it's a question I'm always interested.
One other thing, personally, I lived in Europe for 3 years when I was a child.
Yeah.
And I think, so I've always had this connection to Europe of the 60s and World War II and right after, because we lived there when I was very little in the 50s, and you could still see the impact of World War II on the landscape. And so that's always kind of been part of my kind of early memories. And so I think I'm revisiting that a lot.
You could even see, to this day, you could even see like in the you could even see traces of World War I still being there. Like if you go in the east of parts of France, around Verdun, you can still see the shapes of the trench. Of course, it has been covered, but you still have 1 century later some like physical, like you can still see like some of what was there. So that's where did you live when you were in Europe?
A year in Cologne, Germany, and 2 years in Stockholm. But we traveled extensively as a family throughout Europe during that time.
Okay, but that's interesting. That's interesting. Was it because of your parents' work, or?
Yes. My father was with Stanford Research Institute, and they had corporate clients in Europe.
Okay. And so I had a question around World War II specifically, and I think it's particularly interesting to ask you that because you started designing at the end of the 70s, probably started playing during the 70s. And I think you mentioned the fact that you watched or maybe so, I don't know if you watched all of it, but the interview that I had with Jack Rady, I think it was a year or so ago. And that was also part of our discussion specifically around World War II, the East Front, and its representation in wargaming and how it evolved. And I was wondering, did you feel from your perspective that the way the East Front was depicted in wargaming evolved significantly over the last 40 years? And for yourself, did you also change the way you see the event, and did it have an impact on the way you are designing games about it?
Yes. I mean, there's a couple things you said there. Yeah, I think there was a tendency in the 70s at SBI to be more German, definitely more German-centric than Soviet. And I would say that Jack Rady was critical in helping change that view. I seem to recall him commenting on my order of battle in Rostov. I might be wrong about that, but
I wouldn't be surprised.
yeah, but just opening our eyes to other sources, right? And then there's been a lot more sources on the East Front that have become available since then. And so I think that my game, Enemy Action Kharkov, I mean, it's not at a very detailed level. The units are all divisions and so forth, but still, it's based on. I think if that game were designed around 1979, its order of battle would be different.
Yeah,
and wrong. Yeah.
And that's interesting. So I was actually having a quick chat with, because when I knew that you were going to go on the show, I actually sent a small mail to Jack to ask how he was doing. And because he's working on his new version of Carson Pocket. And I thought it was funny, and you would like to know that, is that he actually sent me a very long mail explaining one of the things that he found about Carson Pocket in the latest research that he was doing right now. And it was funny to see that still today, his research on the Soviet archive is changing the way he's depicting the Carson Pocket specifically, and he found new bits of elements. And it's really fascinating. It's really fun to see that he's still so much digging into the things and still working through it. He's really a fascinating guy. So that's that was a fun bit. And so he tried to explain me something, but it's so detailed that for me, like, it felt a bit like, yeah, of course, yes, okay, that specific division wasn't supposed to be there at that time, at that hour. Good, okay, yes, that's Simon. it was quite a funny exchange. I hope that I will have the opportunity to invite him again when the new Carson Pocket will be released. Yes, but that's it. I had one last question, maybe around the background that I had for you. I was looking back at your career and the game that you had released, and I noticed something. So you've been designing game for 40 years, but it wasn't 40 consecutive years. It feels like you had if I'm not wrong or mistaken, that there is a gap between around 87 and 2009. Even though there is strategy and tactics that re-released the game on Army Group South in the middle, but that was just I think a new version
I had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what it felt like. It was just a reprinting of something of the game that was released in '79. So there is that 22-year gap in the middle, and I have two questions for that gap. And you might not want to talk about it, but just why did you stop designing at that time? Was it just because life like we're more focused on other things, which is often something that happens when depending on family dynamics? And did your approach to game design change between when you were doing wargame design in your first era, you could say, and now since 2009?
So why I stopped is, I SBI folded, and we started with Mark Herman, Victory Games. And so I was, for Victory, we did Ambush, and I did Hell's Highway. And then I was lured away by Coleco, one of the early video game companies, where several wargame designers went to work. Wargame designers and fantasy game designers. And that was short-lived. And then that's when I made the transition into exhibit design. I came back to New York, but I kept doing games freelance because I had contacts that knew me and wanted me to do that work. So for West End, I did RAF and a game called Soldiers. And but then they changed ownership. It had been Eric Goldberg and Greg Kostikian, two great guys in the hobby. But the company was sold to people who didn't seem interested in working with me. And so I just stopped getting anyone asking me to design board games. And I had a full-time job and I had a family. So I just stopped. It wasn't like, oh, I don't like it anymore. No, but no one asked me to. So I didn't. But then in, as you said, around 2000, when was it? 2004, 2005, Redmond Simonson passed away. And that reestablished some communication with people I hadn't spoken to in a while, and a lot of reminiscing and me thinking about the impact he had on my creative life, which was a large impact. And it got me thinking again about game design as something that I love to do. And so, and at the same time, I had stayed friends with Joe Balkowski, one of the great designers in the hobby, and also one of America's great historians on World War II. And he had written D-Day at Omaha Beach. And I read that book and was very moved by it, and looked around, and I didn't see that a game really had been done on it properly. So I just took that on without really thinking that I was getting back into wargame design, but I just really wanted to tell that story. And so that got me back in the hobby. And then once I started working on that, it kind of like opened up Pandora's box for me. And then I decided to look at RIF again and start working on other things. So yeah, so it just, and then I just kind of rediscovered the love of it. So I've been doing it ever since then.
And talking about D-Day at Omaha Beach, there is actually, so Volko Runke is in the chat right now, by the way. Hi, Volko. And he's actually, like, that's perfect. Yes, perfect synchronization. Yes, Volko is actually a question about D-Day Omaha Beach specifically, and he's actually wondering what was your opinion on the movie Saving Private Ryan?
Its depiction in the first 20 minutes of the GI experience on the beach is harrowing and seems accurate, not in a specific event, but in its collection of events that happened. But after that point, after they get off the beach, it's an adventure tale, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a stirring adventure tale, and it's wonderfully told, but it's not a document about World War II. It's not a historical document. But I think the first 20 minutes are.
Okay.
Yeah. That's my thought.
Yeah, I think it was.
Film, but I don't take it serious as an accurate history of anything.
Yeah, but it's true that this specific scene of the first 20 minutes of the violence of the actual combat was like something that when I saw it, I was still quite young. I think I was a teenager then, and I think at that time I've never seen war depicted in that way, and way later, I read a book by John Keegan called The Face of Battle.
Yes,
and
that's a great book.
And it reminded me of that specific scene about what it means to be in battle, the level of violence you expose to, the brutality of it, and how confusing it is. And I made that parallel, and I thought that actually that scene felt even as I grew up even more strongly. Getting older but it was very shocking when I was young. But then even thinking about it, I felt like it had a sort of historical meaning in a way about depicting the experience of soldiers themselves.
And it was, and about the randomness of the violence and the death. It didn't matter if you were heroic or what, or just the bullet. You never know where the bullet's going to fly.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Then I think that's more or less. I think it brushes a good overview of your backstory, because we end up on you coming back into wargaming in 2009, and the idea now is to talk about your current projects and what you're working on right now. But before we do that, John, I'm sorry, but I'm going to take 1 minute just to do a bit of promo, because we talked about the East Front. And I just want to remind everyone that for the Wargame Book Club, so on the 5th of September, we will be having a panel to talk about When Titans Clashed by Glenn Sandhouse, which is actually talking a lot about, that was reinterpreting or new research about the Soviet army and what it was doing on these fronts that inspired a lot of wargame designer. And for that panel on the 5th of September, we have a pretty good panel. Riccardo Massini is going to come back to help me host that show, and I will be hosting with Ricardo in the future all the Wargame Book Club, but I also have Ardwolf from Ardwolf Flair on YouTube, Walter Wejdowski, who's the designer of Verdun 1916 Steel Inferno, but currently designing a game on the East Front that is based also mostly on that book, and Carl Paradis, who designed the No Retreat series, and that was also inspired by that book a lot. So we're gonna talk about this book. So if you're interested in those topics, the depiction of the East Front in wargaming, how research shaped that representation, I strongly recommend that you join us. And if possible, try to have a read at that specific book before then, or at least have a bit of an overview. But that's it for the intro. So I would like to go into the second section, which is talking about your current projects, John. And I think there is one project specifically that I was extremely interested in that I saw in GMT's latest newsletter that was sent by Gene. I think it was last month, not the latest, but the one from the ones before, and that's Downfall. So that's the first game that I was really interested in discussing. That I think just today or late tomorrow actually passed the 500 pre-orders, right?
Yeah. I just noticed that this morning that it got up over 500. So that was good news. I have to send some congratulatory emails around about that.
Yes, congratulations for that. That's great news. That's really awesome. And I would like to know a bit about, well, what's the story behind that design?
Well, Downfall is a game that Chad Jensen started the design on like 10 years ago, maybe even more. And he's always wanted to do a game on the end of World War II, but the end, not the very end, but starting from the high water mark of the Axis expansion, so in late 42, and then going from there to the end of the war. And he toyed with not only different systems, but also different player configurations. For a while, it was a 3-player game, Soviet West no, it was a 2-player game, just Axis against the Allies. And then it was a 3 or 4-player game, which with the Soviets as one of the additional sides and the Germans split into 2 players. And then he finally settled on the idea, which is takes some inspiration from the old game Battle for Germany, that one player should be the Soviets and the Axis defending in the West.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The other player, the West, that is the Western allies of the United States and the UK and France, also controlling the Germans in the East. And so the 2 players were really the Soviets against the West in terms of, yes, we're going to end this war, but who's going to have the advantage when it ends? So that's the game that he had settled on a few years ago and had done an almost complete design for it, but it hadn't had any play testing other than Chad and Kai, his wife, had played it with each other together, and he hadn't written a word of rules. He had some charts and a play aid and the map, and the map looks like it's ready to publish because he's a graphic designer as well, and he has setup charts for all the setting up the scenario that and I'll show some of that. So we had this game that looks like it's ready to publish, but it was missing rules, except that what you could glean from his genius graphic design, because you can look at the map and look at the way it interacts with the cards. The game also has cards, and with notes on those things and the way the tracks work, and you can kind of piece together how the whole thing worked. And Kai had played it several times, although it was always evolving. So she had some good memory of it too. So Gene wanted to see some of Chad's unfinished projects published. And then the other angle on this is that Chad developed my game Space Corp. And so Chad and I and Kai knew each other for some years, but on the Space Corp development experience got us pretty close. And I just really enjoyed their company. And we got together to do a lot of gaming other than Space Corp. And so, so Chad's passing, it was hard for all of us. And anyway, Gene wanted to see if some of Chad's unfinished projects could get finished and published. Dominant Species Marine was actually all finished by Chad, so that got published. But there were a few other projects, and then Downfall I would often see sitting on Chad and Kai's big game table when I'd go up there to get together with them, either to work on Space Corp or just to play games. And he would never let me play it. He said, no, it's not quite ready. Not quite ready. So he pushed it around a little with me once, but just to show me his ideas, but we never actually played it. But I was just fascinated by the So when Gene put out that call, I volunteered to finish it. So I've been working on that now with Kai for almost a year now. And we've now got it to the point where we've brought on a developer from GMT, Bruce Mansfield, and also Jason Carr. The two of them together will be developing the game with me. That's the state of the game right now, because now there is a complete set of rules. I have written a set of rules for the game and added some more play aids, and we've made some revisions along the way, but nothing about the essential system and the order of battle has changed. The maps that's all the same. I think the final art will be a blend of Chad's work and then revisions by others.
Yeah, sure. And maybe it would be great just to maybe look a bit at the at some of the components. So maybe looking at the map and the cards, and maybe start discussing about the system, how it works, and not without going into too much details, but at least giving a bit of a sense of the dynamic, what the game is doing, how it's working, and then we can.
Screen?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so screen sharing, yes. Screen 1. Every system is a little different. Okay, so is that being shared now?
Yes, it is, and you can go. On.
And then I'm going to go into full
view.
Screen.
Yeah, it's in the view menu.
View menu, right? Enter full screen. Okay, great. So that's a little better. So what you're seeing here is the game board, the map. And it's big. It's going to take, it'll be 2 regular size maps abutted together so that the hexes are actually like an inch across. And the reason for that is because the units they're not blocks, they're cardboard counters, but they're going to be the rotator where you rotate them to indicate pips, 1 to 4 pips, and I'll show you the counters. So this kind of space, and the counters are going to be like 5/8 inch. That'll allow you to get your hands in there and manipulate the counters as you have to. So this is showing Europe in late 42. That's when the longest scenario starts. There's 8 turns to the game. That's the turn track up here in the upper left corner. Each turn is 4 months in time, 3 turns to a year. One of the key systems of the game is that it's based on initiative. So you have 2 players controlling 4 factions. The Soviet player controls the Soviet armies and the German armies in the West. The Western player controls the US and UK armies and the Germans in the East. But each faction is played separately. So there's, 4 turns, except that the turns aren't just in sequence. There's this initiative track. And this is the thing running along the top of the board and then down the right side. And each faction has a marker on that. And when you take your turn, you'll do something that costs a certain amount of initiative. And so if you do something that's just a couple initiative, it might be your turn again. But if you do something that takes 10 or 15 spaces, you might not go again for a long time. So you have to do that type of planning. And when I talk about, I'm going to now try to share, let me talk about the map a little more first. It's a pretty large scale game. It's about 110 kilometers in each hex. The scale is armies and corps. It starts with the Germans still in Africa, and most of the Allied forces still in the US and the UK. So the naval system is important at the start of play, less important as the game progresses. But it does have air and naval on an abstract level. And there's also strategic warfare, which is represented by these 3 tracks on the board. So, but if you want to ask any questions, there's so much I could go into about the game, But I
But
was
I think
thinking,
no, it was a great overview of the map, and I think the initiative part is super exciting, and I'm interested in that, of course. But that's I don't want to go too much into details. I think like looking at the cards and the counters would be interesting, just to see how the card play works. But also, you were saying that the counters had this pip system where you pivot to show the different strength, a bit like a block game. I think it would be interesting to see that too.
let me find that one. That's going to be.
And of course, in the chat, if any of you have questions for John about Downfall or anything, feel free to ask.
Now, is that now you see this one?
Yes, we do, and we actually have a question from Volko before we talk about the counters. And yeah, you can go in full screen mode also if and Volko's question is specifically around the victory condition. He's wondering, yes, what are the victory condition for the two players?
Yeah. So, well, I just took the map down, but victory can happen during the game, or if not during the game, is assessed at the end of at the like summer of 1945. But both the Soviets and the West earn objectives. There were hexes on the map that were outlined in red. Those are objectives, and there was a track along the left edge that listed all the objectives, and you would mark them as you got them. But during play, if one side gets too far ahead in objectives, like with an advantage of 7 objectives over the other, something like that, the game will end. So you have to keep up the pressure so that you're relatively close in where you are in your conquest of the Reich. The game can also end if your partisan war is going especially well. If you've taken enough territory and your partisans are controlling territory, that's the way for the game to end early. Otherwise, at the end of the game, whoever has the more objectives wins. If that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
So those are the counters. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is actually they're side by side. I guess that's the way. This is a PDF. So this is 2 play aids for the setup. The one on the left are the West Germans. The Italians are a dark blue, and the West Germans are a dark gray. And the one on the right is the Soviet setup. So this is showing you where you set up your pieces on the map, the turns they enter play, and some information about the cards. But you can see here, maybe I can zoom. See, when I go full screen, I don't see my zoom controls for the PDF. But
I think if you might click on command and scroll, I think you might be able to zoom.
Command scroll?
Yeah. Oh no, that doesn't work. That was a bad idea.
Anyway, actually, I've just switched pages. The one on the, but this is good because the one on the right is the Germans in the east, and the thing on the left is a explanation of your orders. So the units, I think this is big enough now. If you look at this unit in the upper left corner of the right-hand page, you can see that it's rotatable. It's an infantry army, and the way it's printed on the page here, it's on its 3-step side, but you would rotate it to change it from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. So this looks kind of like the blocks in the game, like Triumph and Tragedy, but these are actually cardboard units, and some of them are infantry. There's armor, and there's the allied units. These are Romanians and Bulgarians and Hungarians. There's naval units. There's air units. But these markers down here that I'm circling are the order markers. Every faction has a set of order markers, and all 4 sets go into a cup, and then they're laid out. There was a display on the map that holds 10 of the markers, and so they're drawn from the cup, and those are the orders available to the factions on their turn. And so this play aid here on the left is showing all the orders available to the Soviet player, only some of which are actually available at a given moment, depending on what's on the available track. and these are all the orders available to the OKW player, which is actually the same player, right? So the Soviet faction and the OKW faction. So when the Soviet player has the initiative, they're going to look at that order track, and they can also have one order in reserve. You can put it in planning, so you always have something to do. And they're going to choose which one of those things to do. And some of them are to attack, some are to move, some are to do a combined operation, which could be pretty powerful, and it costs more initiative. So this over here, it's telling us what the costs are. This one only costs 2, this movement one, but this combined operation costs 9. They can also recruit, which is to build up their forces and to bring in reinforcements. That costs a lot. Mechanize is the same thing, but about armor. That costs a lot. Or they can do partisan warfare, which allows them to place partisans in various nations. These West Germans also have operational orders. They're slightly different because of the forces they have. See, each op marker shows you visually what type of unit that order will activate. So some movement orders will activate everyone, but some, like in this example, will only activate your elite units and your fortresses. And the Soviets don't have any that activate Navy because they don't have one. But by contrast, the U.S. move markers also allow them to move naval units. The OKW has one marker that allows them to move naval units, which early in the game includes the Italian Navy, which is important in the Mediterranean to their supply. So the German orders are in some way similar, but they also have things like material priority, because that affects whether the OKW or OKH gets something they need. So there's one side over the other in that way. And command failure can make your Axis counterpart lose initiative. So you can use that against the other side. The US is similar. They also have strategic warfare. So I know we've got a lot to cover, but I think this gives you an kind of units.
That's actually,
these are event cards, which are there's one deck of event cards. These are like strategic events that kind of propel the game forward. Things like if this event happens when the Soviets are approaching Bulgaria, Bulgaria surrenders, that sort of thing. And then also the event cards drive the acquisition of action cards, which are a hand of cards each faction holds that allows them to influence combat or to do special things at the beginning of their turn to strengthen their efforts.
So you would say it's not strictly a card-driven game, but more card-assisted, where you have specific events and okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
I'm really
order tiles and the initiative system kind of drive the game.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I really like this idea that you're actually at a strategic level also making decisions about military planning itself on the material and what kind of prioritization you want to have. And this idea that the more you're going to invest on costly action, the more you're going to have to wait for and giving the opportunity to your opponent to react. That sounds super, super interesting. And regarding the playtime of this game, so you said the longest scenario is starting in 1942, but I guess as you were saying, there are multiple scenarios for the game. And I was wondering,
there will be. Those are still being developed, but the game is long. If you play the full game, you're looking at, I'm thinking like 20 hours. But we will have shorter scenarios that start we'll start at the invasion of Sicily, and another one that'll start at the time of D-Day and Bagration. So those will be shorter scenarios. So the full game is 8 turns long, and a turn can take a couple hours to play, because that initiative track you saw on the board, you make a full circuit of that track in a game turn, all 4 factions, right? And then a new turn starts. So there's 8 turns in the long game, and then there'll be scenarios of 6 and actually 3.5 turns, because the track allows a turn to start in the middle. We can put the markers for the factions right in the middle.
At different initiative level,
we can actually pick a specific date and put the markers where they need to be to you can almost think that each day on that, each space on that track is like a day. It's a little more than a day.
Yeah. Okay, but that's super interesting. And I was wondering more in the design process for you. Oh, do you want to show something else?
I was
Or
just going to show the action cards, which I had here. What did I do with them? Oh, bear with me.
yes, I am. I'm looking at the chat at the same time.
Here we go. Action card
yes.
update. Okay. Do you see that?
Yeah, I'm going to bring it back. Here they are. It already looks really polished in terms of design. It's quite
Chad.
yeah.
That is the magic of Chad. Everything you're seeing here is his work. So when I say there were no rules, that's true. There was no rule book, but all this stuff was done and looking like this. So it was kind of like forensic game design.
Yeah, and actually, that's what we're at this. How is it to actually, like, for you as a designer to pick up the work of someone that you worked with in the past, that you have, like, that you were close to, but looking into what he left and trying to figure out how to make a finalized game out of it. What was the experience like?
It was fascinating for me because the game, the more I dug into it, the more of the game revealed itself. And, I just got inspired by these connections I would suddenly see that turned something that was mysterious into this beautiful little elegant system. Well, not little, but made of many little parts working together. Yeah. Yeah.
So those action cards.
This, for example, these are Soviet action cards. These are Axis action cards. Now, the two Axis factions draw from the same deck. So this is a card that gives you an advantage. This Army Group C card gives you an advantage in combat. It's called a headquarters card. It increases your pip strength and gives you a die roll modifier. But it's better for the OKW than it is for OKH. Two factions. This is a card that allows you to make an extra attack. Cards that allow the Germans to deal with partisans. Cards that are only for the Axis miners, or that only work for the Axis miners. The U.S. cards down here operate similarly, but they range from cards that give you some kind of little strategic bump, or a card that gives you a very specific and sharp advantage in combat. So you have a nice selection to choose from, and the cards are distributed unexpectedly by event. The events trigger card deals to the various factions. Yeah.
Okay.
And that was something that, again, there was no rule describing how the cards were distributed. I had no idea, but as I looked at the event cards, it became clear. Yeah.
And so this has so you're currently in a playtest phase, right?
Yes. We have Bruce Mansfield completed a really nice Vassal mod now. We were using a very rough one earlier in testing, but now we're ready to expand testing, and hopefully people will make some paper kits too, because I think it's really important, especially in a game where you're doing a little something different with the way the counters work. It's unusual to have rotating cardboard counters. I want to get feedback. We need feedback on that, because when you play it on Vassal, it's not an issue. You just hit the rotate button.
But that's something I was wondering about, because the experience on Vassal is significantly different from the physical experience. And as a UX designer, you know that, and you'll always have the discussion around how do you align your counters when you're face to face. Do you align to something that doesn't make sense to any of us on the side, and we all agree that facing north is the way that we do it, or should I align it on what makes sense for me and what makes sense for the other player? So I guess that's going to be an interesting discussion, I guess, for you guys. Do you have any thoughts on?
I don't want Vassal to be driving any UX decisions. want of a better word. It has to be done on paper, across a table from each other.
Great. But if there is a playtest form or something like this, and you want me to add it to the description of the video, I would be happy to add it there. You are looking for playtesters, or you already have?
Yeah, well, Bruce and Jason and I are actually meeting. We're going to get together, and then Jason's going to make an announcement on GMT, probably in the next month
Newsletter
for that.
Yeah. Okay, great.
But if people are interested, you can definitely get in touch with us.
Good, great.
Yeah, but we want people who will test the whole damn game, not a few turns and say it's great. Yeah, we know it's great.
That's really important to so and as you were saying, like, it requires a high level of commitment, so you need to be able to put in a 20-hour game, definitely. But that looks amazing. Thanks a lot for sharing all of that.
Sure.
But so that was for Downfall, but that's not the only project that you are working on right now. You're also working on another project that this one is completely yours, and it's a new series that you started, I think, a few years ago with Conquest, called Enemy Action.
Yes.
And it was originally Enemy Action Arden, and you're working now on Enemy Action Kharkov. And I was wondering maybe if we could talk a bit also about this. And it's actually quite interesting. I see that since you came back in 2009, you actually launched quite a significant amount of new series. So you have the D-Day series, the Kharkov series. Is there, like, World War II Commander is apparently also going to be a series. That's something that we're discussing a bit before. And I think it's really interesting. Do you like working as in series of system a lot? Like, is it something that is something that you appreciate more now than you did before? Or do you like creating like systems that could grow in different topics?
I usually don't start with the idea that it's going to be a system. Well, that's not true with the Battle World War II Commander. I mean, that was intended to be a system of games originally on the iPad.
Yeah.
And the iPhone. So a system was designed to support multiple applications. In the case of, like, the D-Day system, it was just D-Day at Omaha Beach at first. And the design, everything about the design was trying to communicate the Omaha Beach, experience. That's not the best word, but then it was suggested it would work for other invasions, and so I didn't take that, lightly. I really researched. I didn't know much about the Pacific invasion, so I really researched them before deciding whether it was appropriate. And then I felt that it was, so I did Tarawa and Peleliu. But then now I've had enough of that system, actually. I'm glad for other people to take it on, but it's been suggested that system could be used for things like Stalingrad, and I just disagree with that. It's not appropriate for that type of approach. I think in the case of the invasion games, because the defense was somewhat static, and it was really about I must say, it was really about the American perspective. Whereas a battle like Stalingrad, I wouldn't want to say the Soviets are a faceless enemy. That is just not right.
Yeah.
In that case, and that we're trying to celebrate the heroism of the German invaders. I ain't doing that.
Thank you for not doing that.
Yeah. So, but the Enemy Action series is that I did see as a series when I thought, if I could pull off, my goal was to do an operational level hex encounter war game, but solo, but also 2-player. So I wanted to do it too. Well, it was to do a solo game, but also to use the card-driven system that has been so popular. Starting with Mark Herman's games, and Mark Simonich has done games with that, and other people. And I thought, but they're always strategic or super tactical, like Combat Commander. So I thought, well, what about an operational battle with operational issues being represented by the cards? And so I thought that would be a great 2-player game. And then I also thought, let's do an operational game solo with hex and counter movement, and how all that is managed in a solitaire experience. So those were 2 challenges I took on. And then I chose to do a subject that I knew very well. So I was comfortable with the material. So I chose the Battle of the Bulge for Enemy Action Ardennes. And then that game took like a long time, or the 3 games really. It took a long time to do, and I was very, very pleased with the results. And I wanted to try the system again with a different operational story. So I wanted to choose a wide open sweeping battle, not a road and forest congested battle. So I looked at the Eastern Front and chose the Third Battle of Kharkov for the second game in the series. And what you're seeing here is the map for the 2-player game, and it works the same way. You have a hand of cards that you play from to determine what formations you're going to activate to do things, and you can also play the cards to as events that drive more strategic issues, or to aid you in combat. So you're seeing the battlefield sideways here. North is on the right edge of the visual here, and so we're looking kind of from the Soviet perspective. The front line is roughly in this area at the start of play, and historically the Soviets at some point took most of the map, and then lost a lot of the map after that due to the counterattack from von Manstein's backhand blow. But the game begins by simulating Operation Star and Operation Gallop, and the Soviets have initial success, and then the Germans counterattack. And so it was a challenge to design that kind of ebb and flow into the game. But the 2-player game is just a mid-level complexity war game. And then I also designed the German solo and the Soviet solo version of the game. And so the next map I'm going to show is the same ground, but this is the German solo version. And I think, oh, here it is. Just going to swing this over here. Okay.
Yep.
So actually here the map is flipped because the German perspective, oh, I should put this full screen, right? Full screen. There we go. So now North is on the left edge of the map, but it's the exact same terrain. And the difference here is that the map is encoded with information that's used in the Soviet AI that runs the game. And I want to back up a minute and say that one of my philosophies of a solo game design is it's not a bot for the missing player. It's a system that is not only controlling the other side, but taking advantage of the solo experience to create more fog of war. You don't really know where the enemy is a lot of the time, and the enemy doesn't know what you're doing either. And so I think, and that's the case with Enemy Action Ardennes as well, just because you see something on the map doesn't mean you can take advantage of it. And just because you don't see it on the map doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
About it. So, so here this encoding is used to determine some of the default moves the Soviets can make, those little arrows in the hexes like there were in Ardennes. These color areas, there's this yellow area here and this kind of pinkish area here. Those are logistics areas. What that means is the Soviets are especially interested in getting those areas clear of Germans, because to advance much beyond those points, they need to have the road network there clear for their supply. So the system will focus on those areas a little more than before. They'll focus much more on plunging deeper. Although there are some Soviet forces that disregard that and drive forward, and others that are a little more concerned with mopping up and taking care of the flanks.
And just out of curiosity,
yeah.
Does it mean that in the game you have actually a different version of the same map, and you just pick a map depending on are you going to play solo or two-player? Or
that's right. Like in Enemy Action Ardennes, there's a two-player map, there's a German solo map, and there's, in this case, a Soviet solo map.
So the game is actually 3 game, you could say, in a box.
3 maps, 3 rule books. The cards, well, the counters are
the
shared,
same.
although there's informational counters that may vary from game to game. The card deck, if you're the player, you use the player deck. So in the 2-player game, each player uses a player deck. But in the solo game, you use the player deck for your side, and then there's a separate deck for the competition side.
Yeah.
So there's actually 2 versions of the German deck. One used if you're the player, one used if you're playing the Soviets, and then the German deck is used to control the AI.
And can you tell us a bit about
change from Ardennes?
Can you tell us a bit about the card system, just to have a bit of an idea of how the cards are used to interact with the game? Because you said that, and it was really interesting what you were saying earlier, that you wanted to have a CDG on an operational level, as opposed to strategic level for games like Washington's War or I guess also Path of Glory, or very tactical like Combat Commander.
Right. So I didn't bring up what I'm showing you here is actually a part of the back of the box.
The back of the box, yeah.
But it has some of the cards here, and so in this system, each card is a specific formation. So this card here I'm circling is one of the Guards armies in the Southwest Front. I think that's what that says. I'm actually, yeah. And you would play this to do one of the listed things here with that army. That this is a German Kampf group. And let me see what. Oh, and this card here is like all of Army Group South. That doesn't mean you get to activate all of Army Group South, but you have your choice of, you can activate any one formation in Army Group South. And each card can be, so on your turn, you will play one card to activate one formation. And some cards give you choices of what to activate. Some are only to activate that formation. But the way your hand is organized, each turn you have a deck you're drawing from to fill your hand, and you're guaranteed to have at least one card for each formation. You might have 2, and that means that formation will get to be more that turn. But you often have to make choices, because you can play the card for its formation activation, or you can play it for a special event. Here down here, there's some special events, which that's your card play for the turn. Instead of activating formation, you're doing that event. Or some cards can be played to help you in a combat. So if I've played, well, let's say I'm German. I played this card to activate this formation. I could play this card to use it for this combat assist when this formation makes an attack. But then I spent that card, instead of activating something, I've spent it to make a stronger attack. So like in other card-driven games where you have a choice of whether to play the card for operation points or for an event, or sometimes there's a third thing you can do with it. I carried that concept over into this game, although I'm more specific with assigning cards to formations.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's so that's how it relates to the card-driven game idea.
Okay, but that's great. That looks super interesting. I like this idea of having 3 games in one. That's pretty good value, I guess. But thanks for walking us through this. And you were also saying before we started actually that there is potentially another thing that is gonna come up, and that's the volume 2 for the World War II Commander series.
Yes.
But I think we can talk a bit more about this because I'm going to invite you to come back on the show for a teach and play of World War II Commander on the Bulge, and we could talk also a bit about your upcoming game. But what is the topic of the upcoming game in that series?
Oh, so that the next volume in World War II Commander. Are you still seeing my screen share?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to stop that.
Oh yeah. Okay, I can. I removed it from the stream, so it's all good.
Okay, so stop screen sharing. Okay. Yeah, so the second volume, so World War II Commander Battle of the Bulge is a kind of entry-level war game using the same design for the design I did for an iPad game called Battle of the Bulge that was published by Shenandoah Studios and then was picked up by Slytherin. But the original board game design was pre-existing, and that's now been released by Compass as a board game, and now we're working on a second volume that's on Operation Market Garden, and so we're just beginning playtesting on that as well. Bob Heinzman is the developer, and he's put out a couple of calls for testers on Consum World in the Compass topic there, and we're going to do more recruitment soon. So that game, we have a Vassal mod for testing. But so if we have another session on Battle of the Bulge, I could talk some about it then. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think it would be great to talk about this. And I think there is a general topic that I'm not going to address today because we won't have time. We're actually getting dangerously close to the 90 minutes mark already, which I didn't expect. Yeah, it really went extremely fast. But I wanted to talk about because you talk about Coleco, and I was thinking about the Coleco Vision and of course video games, and you were saying that this was originally developed as an iPad game, and there is a whole part of the discussion that I wanted to have with you around wargaming, physical and video games, that I voluntarily excluded from that discussion for today, knowing that we won't be able to address all of the topics. But I guess that's something that we can discuss a bit while we're playing World War II Commander in the future. But I will set up a date. I will let everyone know who want to watch this stream when it's going to happen, but that's something to discuss in the future. But thanks for walking us through all of this. I'm super excited about Downfall and very interested in that enemy action system. So that's also something that we'd be really keen on exploring. So we have 13 minutes left. That's not what I expected. And we still have 2 sections. So everything is going perfectly fine as usual. I'm completely not on time, so that's great. And I originally planned for a very small interlude that I wanted to introduce, which is the Wargame Questionnaire, which is based on Proust's Questionnaire, but also Pivot's Questionnaire. It was a bit of a game that you had in intellectual salons in France in the 19th century, and the idea is to ask a series of questions that you expect the responder to only have one word around it, but of course then it becomes a discussion about why this one word, and it's a series of 10 questions, and it can be a bit cheeky and everything, so don't get offended by some of the question, I hope, John. So let's do that, and then have a final section on starting discussing about solo specifically. But yeah, if you feel ready for the questionnaire, yes. So my first question to you is simple, not too hard. If you had to bring only one game on a desert island, what would it be?
One game, and does it have to be a game whose title is only one word?
No.
But am I alone on the desert island?
Yes, I would say you're alone.
So it has to be a game I can play solo, huh?
It doesn't have to be. You can multi-hand it.
One game on a desert island. I don't know. It might be Combat Commander, because I'm assuming I'd have all of the all of the volumes, so I could just play it forever. Endless
Yes.
scenarios, and then the scenario generator. I really enjoy playing that game.
And if you are alone on a desert island, you might have time to figure out a solo mode for it anyway. So
yeah, I've been asked about that. Like, hey, how about solo combat command?
Yeah, that could be fun. So we have to put you on a desert island then. That's the plan. Good. So that's for question 1. Question
Can I still
2.
have a martini when I'm on the island?
Yeah, that's fine. Like you can have as much alcohol as you want, just one game. That's the rule. Question 2 is, if you had to pick a game to introduce someone to wargaming, what would it be?
To introduce someone to wargaming?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Introduced to, well, I guess I would pick my Battle of the Bulge, World War II Commander. I mean, that's kind of the selfish answer.
Yeah, very selfish.
But I'm trying to think of some games I have played with, with friends who are not war gamers that are. The game Paulus has elements of war in it, and that's a really good game. I might recommend that. Or Time of Crisis.
Yes.
The game on the Roman emperors, because I've definitely gotten non-war gamers to play that, and it has battle in it. So
yes,
that Ray Farrell's game, that's a really great game.
It's a great game. I really like it. Question 3: what designer you think should be figuring on a banknote?
I would say Redmond Simonson.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd look really good on money, I think.
That's a really good reason to be on a banknote.
And he's had this like long-term impact on the hobby. What
game you wished you had designed?
What game do I wish I had designed? If you asked me that in like 1980, I would say Civilization, the old Avalon Hill game. I was just blown away by all the things that game was simulating. More recently, I might say Triumph and Tragedy. I think it's an amazing 3-player game, which is very hard to do. A good 3-player game, and it's a great overview of the war in Europe, and it's a lot of fun to play.
Next question is, what is your favorite swear word when you roll a bad dice?
I don't roll bad dice. If the dice roll isn't what I think it should be, I say, well, as a designer, for the sake of the play test, we have to change that roll. So,
Yeah,
I just whine when I get a bad roll. I don't swear. I just whine about how unfair it is.
So, squares, hexes, points, or areas?
Squares. Definitely not squares. I can't handle squares. But it would either be hexes or areas, depending on the scale.
Yeah. What would you say is your wargaming guilty pleasure?
Wargaming guilty pleasure. Oh, like an overly complex game on a subject where I know I'm wasting a lot of time playing it, but I'm just really enjoying the intricacies of the system.
Yeah. And you have a specific game in mind?
There was the old game on what's it called? Lost Victory. Lost Victory. GMT, designed by David James Ritchie, who was a good friend of mine in the old days. Unfortunately, passed away. Did a game on Kharkov, the same battle that I'm doing, and the game had like tables and tables about if you had a snafu, like 27 different things that might happen to your combat, and you had to roll, and then you had to do another roll, and it was Baroque, and I loved it.
Then, and that's a tricky question, but your design that you deplore the most?
My design?
Yeah.
That but it has to be my design. Well, the first effort I made at designing a game on the Battle of Britain was called Battle Over Britain, and it was too big and overblown. It was designed. It was the last thing I designed at SPI, but it was published by TSR. But it was too big and overblown. However, doing that then led me to design R.I.P, which I'm very proud of. So I learned from it, but it was not. It was not. I felt a successful design.
And then last question: what is the quality you like most in a war game?
The quality I like most in a war game. I guess just the narrative of the story the war game tells as you play it.
Yeah,
that's true of any game. Yeah.
So the narrative. So that was the small war game questionnaire. Not too painful. Yes. So you were the first one that went through it, and the idea is to have all of the guests go through it and maybe have at some point a compilation of the war game questionnaire for each of them.
Now, is this like a Myers-Briggs? Am I going to get an analysis of?
Yeah. But I'm going to give that in a week when you're not here, because I don't want you to feel embarrassed. But you had some pretty revealing answers there. I think that there is a lot to consider. There is definitely a lot to unpack. But no, thanks for playing the game. So we are at 1 hour and 26 minutes, and I had that last section around solo gaming specifically. And my question to you would be, should we keep that for another time and you come back on the show and we address that, or do you...
I don't know. Do I have more to say about that? I mean, I thought I said a lot.
About solo gaming? I guess I had a specific question about it, but I'm worried it would get extremely long.
30.
Yeah, we're getting really close to an hour and a half. I guess maybe I could ask you one question, if that's okay, around that.
But happy to get together again too. So
yes, but that would be great, definitely. But I would still ask you one specific question. And that's something that is a topic that I'm really interested in, and is, so I see that you worked on the solo module for academy games, Conflict of Heroes.
Yes.
And there is right now something that comes up each time a game is announced by GMT or by any other publisher. There is always this question: does it have a solo mode? Does it have a solo mode? Does it have a solo mode? And there is this ongoing question about, can we have a solo version of that game that is made for 3 players or 2 players or 4 players? Do you think, as someone who's designed a lot of solo game, that every single game should have a solo mode? And why not?
I don't think every game needs a solo mode. I think there are many 2-player games that you can play solo by playing both sides and just kind of enjoying the interaction. I know it's harder when there's cards and hidden information and that sort of thing, but I think if you're a war gamer, part of what you love to explore is all the possible strategies and outcomes that the battle could have, and you can do that playing both sides by yourself. Like with Downfall, I think people will agree once it comes out that it does not need a solo version, because you can pretty easily play the game faction by faction by faction, because the initiative system, you don't know who's going next. So it's kind of easy to anyway, I found it kind of easy. I guess that's an answer to the question. And also, it depends on what you mean by a solo version. Does it just mean it's a lot of work, but a bot that represents the missing player? Or is it something more? Like even in Space Corp, the solo game is not complex at all, but it's not just, I'm not replacing 3 players with 3 little bots. I basically created this single combined competition and narrative that's going on outside of you while you're playing the game. So, so that was a dedicated effort to design that. It wasn't a patch on it.
Great. But that's a really good point, I think, about the multi-handed side, which I think sometimes it's also a really great way to explore the system and understand it. So that's a really interesting point. But we're at 90 minutes, so I will shut up, not ask any more questions. I will thank you, John, for taking the time. That was awesome. I'll follow up discussing with you to see when we can plan that teach and play, and potentially during that session talking about more video games and tabletop war games. That would be a great discussion, and maybe addressing some of the questions that I had around the solo gaming experience, because I also wanted to know your relationship with solo gaming, but that can be a completely different discussion. I just have one thing to announce, and that's for the show for next week. So Phalanx Game was kind enough to send me that copy of Europe Divided by David Thompson and Chris Marling, and David will be on the show next week to actually teach me the game and teach you by the same way, and we'll have a playthrough of it afterwards. So I would really recommend that you come over if you have any interest in this and want to see how it plays. I already played it one time a while ago with Scott Moore, and it was a really interesting card-driven game about the post-Cold War conflict of influence between Europe and Russia. So if you want to see that, Europe Divided next week with David Thompson himself. Thanks again, John, for coming on the show. It was great having you. Thanks for everyone that was here and interacted and asked a lot of questions. That was really great to have all of this. So thanks for all of that, and have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. I look forward to David's show next week.
Yes, be there.
Okay.